Artificial intelligence has become a big subject of debate in North Dakota. And it's a little bit different than the national debate we're having over AI, right? I mean, people are worried, how does it fit into an academic setting? What's the ethical way to use this? What does it mean for our politics when, maybe the zone of public debate can be flooded with AI generated content that may not be entirely accurate. But for North Dakota specifically, we're having a debate about infrastructure that supports AI, because AI does a lot of positive things too. It's a lot of great. I've said before, we use AI to help produce this show in some small ways. It's a great tool, and like it or not, it's coming. And people who provide the infrastructure for AI, which is specifically the data centers where a lot of the computing behind that service is done, they see North Dakota as a good place to invest. Applied Digital specifically has a facility already built in Ellendale. And by all reports, obviously that was an arduous process, as you would expect a large facility like that to be. But by all reports, the locals seem happy. There were some growing pains, but they're happy. They're happy it happened. Now, in Harwood, just north of Fargo, Applied Digital is working on building another data center. It's about a $3 billion investment. And it's received some pushback. There's people who are concerned about that it could drive up utility prices. People are concerned about things like sound. People are concerned about things like traffic during construction. And so to talk about some of that is Wes Cummins. He is the CEO of Applied Digital. He agreed to come on the Plain Talk podcast and take some of our questions about this. Wes, first of all, thank you. And second of all, I want to get right to something that did bother me a little bit, I guess as a member of the news media, was some non-disclosure agreements that your company had local officials in Fargo and Harwood sign. And I'm pretty sure you also had officials in Ellendale sign these as well. In some ways, I know that these NDAs are not untypical, especially when we're talking about industrial or business development. But I mean, it raised a lot of eyebrows and it raised a lot of concern when we hear our public officials who serve us, the public, are signing these NDAs. So talk to us a little bit about them. Why were they necessary? What did they cover?
Yeah, so excuse me, on the NDAs, for us, it's common practice, but there's two primary purposes for the NDAs, and the what I will say is there is no purpose to keep information away from the public that they need to have to be informed, to know what's going on. These are typically things that we do prior to us launching a project or doing a project. And there's the first purpose, Rob, is we are a publicly traded company. We need to have people understand that some of this information could be deemed material non-public information from an SEC purpose. And we don't want someone getting in trouble trading in our shares in front of what may be a big, stock moving announcement and our stock did actually move when we announced the deal in Harwood. So this is for protection, primarily for the people that we give this information to. And they don't tell, if you just walk through this, we have the mayor and he's not steeped in public company rules and regulations. And he tells a couple of, his friends or people that work around it or people that he's close with that, this big new project could be coming. And then they go and find our company and they say, you know what, this is interesting. Maybe I'll buy their stock. And then you have this issue of potentially violations and insider trading laws. So that's one, is to protect the people that we're giving this information to. And then two, from a company perspective, one of the big parts is protecting ourselves and our competitive information, not in the instance that we go forward with a project, but really in the instance that we don't go forward with a project, because there's projects where we have talked to people about that we have not moved forward with. But if we give them a lot of information, we let them tour our facilities, see how it is that we build our buildings, what we do, some of that information might be competitively sensitive to us. And it's important that it isn't shared if we decide to not go through with the project, right? And in the instance of Harwood, this this came together pretty quickly. We've been speaking to Minn Kota for a long time about it on the utility side, because we spend a lot of time around the country working on the power utility side because there's a few kind of key ingredients that determine where we locate these, and power being the most important one. So that was going on for quite a while. And then it started to come together. As it came together, as we looked at where it would work, we looked at a couple of locations, a couple of pieces of property. And so we asked, a few people to sign NDAs and have a discussion about it and see what it is that we do and see if it was even a possibility. Because if we're just, if it's just kind of a no out of the gate, we've had those, we just move on. But at least we can, doesn't mean that they won't share that information that we gave them, but at least we have, some legal recourse on sharing that information. But our policy, and I think you've seen it with us in the state in the past, is we like to be as transparent as possible, but there's certain things that we need to protect. And some of those things are, people from getting in trouble from laws that maybe they're not familiar with. But that's why we do that. But once we had decided to move forward, it was very, shortly thereafter, we held that town hall. A lot of these deals, if you look around the country, the first time residents hear about it is it shows up on the docket for their local zoning commission, and then they're trying to figure out what it is. Instead, we went out, we gave the information publicly once we had decided to go forward with it, and then we held the town hall, and we took all questions, whether they were positive or people that don't like the project. But we really work hard in the state and just overall as a company to do this transparently, because these projects, we think have a really positive impact, but they're definitely impactful, and we want people to understand what's going on.
So, Wes, thanks for coming on. I think we live at a time where any sort of change people are automatically often opposed to. I mean, we've seen it with pipelines, we've seen it with the tribal casinos up in Grand Forks County, and so I appreciate the transparency you're providing. But I think sometimes what gets lost is what you're actually trying to accomplish, right? I mean, sometimes it's just like the public comment period, just, the mayor's corrupt or whatever. But can you just talk through what will this facility do? How many jobs will it mean to the community? And sort of, from your perspective, what is the upside to Cass County, to Fargo, to Harwood if this thing gets built?
Absolutely. So as Rob started with, AI, controversial topic, I boil AI down fairly simply. There's a piece here where it's probably, and I'll say probably, but I think very strongly, it's by far the most important race we've been in the world. And in my opinion, there's two countries that are racing forward to advance AI, to reach super intelligence, to reach AGI, and it's the United States and it's China. And this is going forward one way, or another. And we're in a race in the U.S. And for Applied Digital, we want to provide that infrastructure inside of the United States for this purpose, and for the the U.S. to really advance their AI initiatives and be the leader. And then AI overall, my opinion is that it's the most equalizing technology, the most equalizing thing, period, in the history of the human race. And when I was a kid, I used to watch the Reading Rainbow, and the thing was always that knowledge is power, right? And you hear that the jingle and the mantra, but this is, if you've used any of the tools, like you use ChatGPT 5 right now, it provides you with PhD level expertise in any field you want, anything you want. Everyone has true knowledge at their fingertips. And so it's a very equalizing technology in the fact that, you have all of the knowledge you need on almost any subject. And so in general, I think there's a lot of benefits. Of course, there's a lot of pitfalls. But when we think about us building our infrastructure, when we think about North Dakota specifically, so these facilities are different than any other data center. North Dakota has not been a place for data center. Applied Digital actually has brought that to North Dakota, because we had a vision back actually in 22. I sat in front of Bank of North Dakota and PSC and talked about how I think North Dakota can be an epicenter for AI. And why is that? these facilities require a significant amount of power and they require a lot of cooling. North Dakota has both of those in spades. They have not been a data center location because they're not close to population centers, right? And all the data centers we build for TikTok and video streaming and every video application we have, Netflix, that's mostly been in population centers. So those population centers have seen data center. But when I look at North Dakota, this workload can move to places where latency is not, it's not as latency sensitive. So it can move to places like North Dakota. And then this opportunity, okay, so North Dakota has power. North Dakota produces 6 times the amount of energy that they use inside of the state. And that includes all energy, but also North Dakota produces over double the amount of electricity that they use in the state. So North Dakota is a huge energy exporter. And what that means is neighboring states create industry based on North Dakota power. So what's going on in Minnesota? What's going on in Des Moines, Iowa, where Microsoft has a big location? What's going on in Omaha, Nebraska, where Google has a big data center location? You're exporting power out of the state of North Dakota for other places to build data centers. And these data centers, they create jobs. They don't create, necessarily a huge amount versus the amount of power they use. But like our facility in Harwood will create 200 to 300 full-time jobs. What we've done in Ellendale is what we plan to do in Harwood. We train a lot of local people, the skill set to go and work in these facilities, and they pay. Our wage is significantly higher than the standard wage, the average wage in North Dakota. So these have a lot of high double digit, low single digit, high double digit, low triple digit paying jobs. And in some cases, jobs that go well into $200,000 and $300,000 range. And we work really hard to hire that locally. We spend a lot. This is a $3 billion building, and then the customer that we expect to have in this building will spend about 2.5 to 3 times that on equipment that goes inside of the building, the GPUs and the servers that work to produce the generative AI. And so what that means is, more high-paying jobs, skilled labor, being on the leading edge of technology, and then of course property tax. So you get all of these economic benefits, and when you have a town like Harwood and like Ellendale, these towns struggle to maintain their sewer systems, to maintain their water, to maintain basic infrastructure. You're dealing in a town of 800 people. In Ellendale, it's 1,100 people. I had a chance to speak with the mayor there last night, and everything that they did in that town, they have to fix a road. Guess what? Special assessment. They need to do something for the sewer. Guess what? Special assessment. And so a project like this is going to create a very large amount of tax revenue for the town and then for the school district and for everything involved. And so it provides that benefits on top of the job, which is skilled labor benefits or skilled labor positions that are high paying. And what I say to a lot of people who agree with me in North Dakota is, why would you export your energy produced inside of your state to neighboring states for their economic benefit when you can just use it right here for your own economic benefit? And that's really the opportunity that we're creating in North Dakota.
I find all that very compelling, to be honest with you, and not least because, if we're being honest, a lot of the energy that North Dakota exports, increasingly is becoming politically fraught. Minnesota's passed laws where they don't want some of our energy that we produce through coal power, for instance. So the idea of creating demand for North Dakota energy inside North Dakota energy, in my mind, creates synergy with our existing industries. Like, I like the idea of diversifying from ag and energy, as important as those are. I like the idea of doing other things too. This is another thing we can do, but also there's symbiosis with the energy industry in that we're creating demand for it. So that's great. I think probably the most common thing when I talk about these data centers in North Dakota, the most common concern I hear from people is the impact on utility prices, because that's something that could be felt, across the region, across the state, potentially. Most of the, sound, things like that, that's in Harwood. I don't live in Harwood. Why do I care about that? Well, I sure care if my electricity bill goes up. These data centers use an enormous amount of electricity. Multiples of what, a given it's like adding a whole nother city or even multiple cities to our power grid. So I understand, the argument has been made that this is, and we're hearing it from your partners in the utility space. We're hearing it from you that this is not going to increase. In fact, we just had a regulator on last week, Sherry Haugen Hofford, who also said, this isn't going to increase. I think people are just having a difficult time understanding how could we add so much power consumption to our grid with the laws of supply and demand. How can we add so much power consumption without prices going up?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me hit a couple of these things. So if North Dakota was a power importer, then I think you have cause for a lot more concern. So when you're a net power exporter and you start using power inside of your state, you just export less power. And so the power is already abundant. If you're a net power importer, like I said, it should be a lot more concerned about it. But if you can utilize the infrastructure inside of the state, inside of your own utility, then that utility makes money because utilities are infrastructure-based businesses, right? They get a yield on their assets that they deploy. So if they have infrastructure that's not being used and it gets better utilization, the best explanation is if you built a big water pipe somewhere and someone was only using a tiny trickle through that water pipe, it's not going to be a very economic pipe. But if you can fill it up completely with usage, then it's going to be a lot more economical. So let me just give the example of what we have seen in Ellendale. We've been running at 200 megawatts in Ellendale for the last couple of years. We located next to power infrastructure. That's the most important thing for us. And so a substation that went unutilized, a significant amount of the time, a lot of surplus wind power fed into the substation, maybe couldn't be transported out. And so with us adding 200 megawatts of load in Ellendale for the last 2 years, we have saved the MDU ratepayers $3.5 million in 2023 that was dispersed back to the ratepayers, and $5.7 million, I believe, in 2024. So we have 2 years of record of utilizing the infrastructure that's there. The utility makes more money and then shares that money back with its customers. Not completely. Obviously, utilities are businesses that make money as well. But if you utilize the infrastructure, again, inside of your state where you already have an abundance of power, what we have seen is power prices actually go down for residents and not up. Again, if you were in a state that imports power and you have a power shortage already and you're trying to use more power, you're probably going to see your prices go up.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So you're saying we basically had in Allendale specifically, we had the capacity, but it wasn't necessarily being used.
Correct.
But yet the utility companies had to pay to maintain that capacity. So it's like if I own a big grocery store, but I only have enough customers to open a couple of aisles, I still have to pay to keep that entire big store open. You're coming in and saying, hey, more customers, you can open up more aisles. Now that money you're spending anyway to maintain all this has a use that's producing something that's being used by a customer. That's
correct.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
That's specifically what we have seen in Ellendale, and you can look.
And do you expect that to also be the case in Harwood?
So in Harwood, you can never guarantee that these things happen. It's the experience we've had, but we're using existing infrastructure. And the other thing, Rob, that it creates, so these are long-term deals that we're doing, right? So we're building 30 to 50-year assets. We sign, initial leases on these with very large companies for 15 years. It not only utilizes the infrastructure, but it allows a lot of certainty in planning for growth. So if you're expecting population growth or industry growth in an area, to be able to have a certainty around a load that you can plan to, for the future, that makes a big difference, because utilities it's really difficult. It's really impossible for them to build new generation, for example, on spec. And so to have these big, steady, long-term commitments in an area really help from a utility perspective to be able to plan for growth and plan for additional capacity. And so that's one of the other benefits that we bring besides just utilizing the current infrastructure more efficiently.
Wes, I think, Rob's up in Minot, I'm in Bismarck. We're hundreds miles away from Harwood. To me, this is a no-brainer, right? I mean, we should absolutely do this, but I'm not really affected by it. It's all upside for me as a taxpayer in Bismarck, North Dakota. an aunt and uncle who live in Harwood. I have no idea how they feel about this thing. But obviously, the decisions that are being made affect individual people. And it's often in these small towns, individual people who like the way things are. Yep. And so, I mean, I guess my question for you referenced earlier, you're a publicly traded company, you're the CEO. You know, it's easy for somebody living across the street from where this facility is being built to think Wes doesn't care about me at all. You know, this is just about what it means for the shareholders, that kind of thing. How do you alleviate some of those sort of NIMBY concerns from people? Because I guarantee the people in Harwood would love this thing if maybe it was 100 miles away. But how do you alleviate those concerns?
Sure. So the way I think about these, and I do care about how it impacts, and we really try hard to go about this all the right way as far as, you know, impact on the people that are right there, because they're the most impacted. And there's certain things that, you know, they're going to be a nuisance for a little while, because large construction, you know, you're going to have trucks. Right. We're going to do everything we can on routing these. We had this discussion actually last night at the meeting, so that we can have the lowest impact we can have. But when I look at these facilities, and just my background, by the way, is I grew up in a town of 200 people in Idaho. I grew up on a potato farm, and one of the biggest points of pride for me is, you know, either you were going to farm, or a lot of, you know, family farms kind of went away in Idaho, and so, you know, you parents tell you do good in school, go to college, so that you can go do, you know, a job somewhere else. And for me, as I grew up, you know, tech was just starting and wanted to do tech, and tech was done in Silicon Valley, and that was it. And so for me to be able to bring the leading edge of technology back to towns like I grew up in, that would have never, in, you know, even 5 years ago, but especially when I grew up, these opportunities for leading edge tech were not even a thought. It was never a possibility. So that's one big point of pride. But also making these from an impact perspective on the people, the lowest impact you can possibly make. So we build, you know, what looks like a warehouse building. Noise is, and there is talk about noise. There is some noise, but it's very, it's really manageable, low grade noise. The biggest noise creator on our site are chillers, which a chiller is a larger size version of your heat pump that sits outside your house. And so you have a fan on your heat pump, you know exactly what that sounds like when that turns on. And so that's the primary noise piece of our sites. But for the most part, you won't really even know, outside of, you can see it, that these sites even exist. It's sitting inside of, you know, 8-inch concrete walls. You're not going to hear servers whirring, or EMF, or those types of items that people would be concerned about. But the goal is to have the absolute lowest, you know, visible and audio impact that we can have. And these projects bring that more than any other project I know. And, you know, for Harwood, it does need to be a certain distance from the town for it to be in the town, and for the town to get the benefits from a tax perspective and an economic perspective. So it's balancing those two things, but absolutely do care about, you know, who's next door. We try to figure out these sites so that we have the lowest impact on neighbors. When we do the sites, like we have a site in Allendale, we've put a sound wall up on, we have Bitcoin mining in Allendale as well, which does create more noise than these facilities will, but we put a sound wall up so that we can protect the neighbors from it. But, you know, and the facilities, you know, my opinion, look pretty cool. I don't think they're an eyesore in any way. But we do try to make it as low as impact as possible, with the maximum economic benefit impact that these kind of facilities can have on these locations.
One, I think, last question is maybe about how your business works, because that's something, you know, I think North Dakotans, we understand how agriculture works. We understand how energy works, familiar with these industries. Yours is new. And so maybe it's helpful for people to understand. I guess my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you guys build a data center, and then you basically contract out that capacity to companies that want to do computing. And I mean, obviously all the big names come to mind, Google and whatnot, ChatGPT. I don't know who your customers are. Maybe you can tell them if you're allowed to. But is that how it works? Like, you build this center, we have this capacity, and then you go about selling the capacity to people who want to use it.
Yeah, so we build the data center, and if you look inside a data center, and people locally are going to be able to see it, and we'll give tours, and you get there's some really cool spots as you go through this, right? You have this massive concrete shell, and that's a pretty cool stage of the data center. It's this massive empty hall of a building, and then it gets built up, and you put a huge amount of electrical gear because data centers require this crazy amount of redundancy, right? Five nines reliability, so it can be down like 23 seconds a month inside of these. So it has a huge amount of redundancy built in, cooling, and all of these go outside of the heat pumps go inside of the facility, and so what we do is we build this really redundant, hardened facility, and then we lease it to a customer on a long-term lease. And you're right. I say publicly all the time, the companies that we focus on are Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon, Oracle. CoreWeave's our customer, and Ellendale, so hyperscale computing providers. And then we typically go for 15-year lease that's fixed, and then there's typically 2 to 3 5-year renewals on those. But these are long-lived assets, and then our job is to operate that facility at extremely high reliability for our customer who's leased it from us, to put their computing inside of the facility and run that computing for customers outside, that could be almost anywhere in the US.
So Rob said last question, but I'm going to get one other in. So if this thing gets approved tomorrow, which obviously it won't, but what's the timeline to being fully funded? Is it a couple of years, 2, 3 years? What's the timeline?
So for this building, depending on when we get to start, it's about 18 months to be fully online. So you have 18 months of construction. There's and inside that construction, there's some busier times and some slower times. So there's when you're putting the prefab, the walls up, when the building's going up, you're going to get more traffic as all of these. So these walls are precast, concrete precast offsite, trucked in, panels that just get tilted up. So you're going to have that portion. And then it turns into, people showing up on site, but you just have an army of electricians and plumbers inside the building. And so that, generally creates a lot less traffic around the facility, and you just have people working. And, the goal here is we would love for it to move forward because you guys live in North Dakota. It sure is a lot easier to put foundations in the ground and tilt buildings up before and then the people that work on site, they sure like it a lot better if they're inside, doing work for the winter versus outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just circling back to the NDA thing, again, living in the environment that we do where it's very low trust, which is not Applied Digital's fault. That's just
Right.
the world we're all living in. Do you think there's a better approach maybe to the NDA thing where it doesn't, because I think people read it and like, well, why are public officials signing this? What are they hiding? I mean, they're already accusing you of hiding things, right? I mean, and I think a lot of that's baseless. I don't, but people are already saying, oh, they're bought and paid for, they're selling us out, they're hiding everything. And then we hear about the NDAs and it creates a problem. Is there a better way to handle that maybe?
So look, we do live in a world, Rob, where, there's a certain, there's like, no matter what you do, there's going to be people that don't like it. Right. And then they're going to grasp at things to say, this is, bought and paid for. I appreciated the mayor and the city council last night. Like, I don't think these guys get paid really anything. They're elected officials. You're in a town.
No, they do not.
Whenever they get paid, it's not enough.
I truly don't even know if they get paid at all. And obviously we run everything transparent and above board. We're not paying people off. These people are making decisions for their own families as well. And the NDA, like I said, it's pretty, in my opinion, benign, and it's really put in place to protect people really on their side, right? I was explaining the insider trading issue, these types of things that are laws that most people like, if I went to, you and Chad, and maybe you guys would know these things and say, man, I shouldn't do this because I know this information. 99.9% of Americans are not going to know that that's a problem. And so, you go through this to protect people on their side. And then obviously we need to protect some of our information, like I said, mostly and almost completely if a project isn't going forward, right? Like we've had those where we go and look and it's just not going to work out. And that way we don't have a bunch of our own information leaking around everywhere with our, for our competitors to get, because we are running a business. We do have competition. So the answer is I would love to find a way that it gives the same protection, because even, a lot of the people who want to yell about, that they're bought and paid for, or we're trying to hide something, would be even happier if one of these guys got in trouble for a simple misstep on something that they didn't know about. And I definitely want to make sure that we protect people as much as we can from those types of things happening. So it's definitely food for thought for us, and things that we're thinking about in the future. We're always, I'm a big sports person, so I'm like a big continuous improvement. We can always improve what we're doing. I think, we've improved from what we did in Ellendale to what we're doing in Harwood, or what we hope to do in Harwood. So there's always continuous improvement, but I do think that regardless of the NDA, like, people are going to find something to poke at for sure. And the NDA is just, it sounds big and scary, and it's really not. It was really more for the protection of the people that we were telling the information to, so that they didn't get in trouble. So that it's really as simple as that. But definitely always room for improvement.
Wes, you said you're a big sports guy. Yankees or Dodgers?
I'm gonna go Yankees, and it's not because of Rob's hat.
Jesus.
But my dad is an absolute diehard Yankees fan. I think he's the only person I know. He still lives in Idaho. Now, but my dad would kill me if I came on and said Dodgers. I lived in LA for a little while, and I went to quite a few Dodgers games. But my dad's one of the few people I know. He lives in Idaho, in the house we grew up in, and he's got like the MLB ticket. I don't even know who buys that on DirecTV.
Oh, not on DirecTV.
I buy the streaming service.
Yeah. He hasn't figured out the streaming part yet, but he watches every single game.
Well, Wes, we said last question, and then in proud Plain Talk tradition, we asked like 5 more questions. So I really appreciate you making time for us.
Absolutely. Anytime. Appreciate you having me.